I still remember that morning with crystal clarity, the moment my entire world crumbled beneath my feet. If someone had told me that a heart could truly shatter from just a few spoken words, I would have laughed in disbelief. But there I was, watching the man I loved more than life itself walk out the door, leaving me and our newborn twins behind like we were nothing more than an inconvenience. I used to believe that love conquered all, that as long as two people truly cared for each other, nothing could tear them apart. How naive I was. Love, I discovered the hard way, isn't always strong enough to triumph over greed, ambition, and the cold manipulation of a woman who calls herself a mother. That morning taught me that my children and I had never truly belonged in his world, no matter how desperately I had wanted to fit in. I met Ryan on a crisp autumn afternoon when golden leaves carpeted the bustling streets of Manhattan. I was Chu, fresh out of college, an aspiring interior designer who had moved to the city with nothing but dreams and determination. He was Ryan Wellington, heir to Wellington and Associates, a real estate empire that stretched from coast to coast, controlling luxury properties that most people could only dream of seeing. But I didn't know any of that when we first locked eyes across that tiny coffee shop in Soho. To me, Ryan was just a charming stranger with the most captivating green eyes I'd ever seen, eyes that seemed to light up whenever he looked at me. He wasn't carrying the weight of an empire on his shoulders in that moment. He was just a man who made my heart skip a beat with his warm smile and gentle laugh. We fell in love the way young people do when they're fearless and full of hope. Ryan wasn't like the wealthy men I'd heard stories about. He never flaunted his money or treated me like I was beneath him. Instead, he was kind, thoughtful, and made me feel like I was the center of his universe. Those first few months together were pure magic. I loved him with every fiber of my being, never imagining that love alone wouldn't be enough to withstand the crushing pressure of the Wellington name and everything it represented. When I discovered I was pregnant, Ryan's joy was infectious. He spun me around our tiny apartment, promising to protect me and our baby forever. But promises, I learned, are fragile things when they come up against the iron will of Victoria Wellington, a woman whose steel-gray eyes could freeze blood and whose heart seemed carved from marble. I'll never forget my first encounter with Victoria. It was exactly 1 week after Ryan told her about my pregnancy. She invited us to an extravagant charity gala at the Wellington estate, a mansion so grand it made fairy tale castles look modest. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbows across walls, adorned with priceless artwork, and every surface gleamed with understated luxury. The moment I stepped through those imposing doors, I knew I was trespassing in a world that would never accept me. The women, draped in designer gowns that cost more than I made in a year, looked me up and down with barely concealed disdain. The men, powerful businessmen and politicians, barely acknowledged my existence as they discussed deals worth millions. Victoria sat like a queen holding court in the center of it all, a crystal glass of champagne in her manicured hand. When her cold gaze finally settled on me, she didn't show outright hostility. She was far too sophisticated for that. Instead, she offered me a smile so artificial it made my skin crawl. "Ryan tells me you're expecting," she said, her voice carrying the kind of chill that made you want to reach for a coat. How unexpected. The way she said that single word, unexpected, told me everything I needed to know. In her mind, I was already written off as a mistake that needed to be corrected. I tightened my grip on Ryan's hand, feeling the tension radiating from his body despite his forced smile. He was trying so hard to keep the peace, but I could see the worry clouding his beautiful eyes. Victoria didn't speak to me again that entire evening, but I felt her watching me, calculating. I knew with bone-deep certainty that this wasn't over. It was just the beginning of a war I didn't even realize I was fighting. In the days that followed, Ryan began to change. It was subtle at first. Missed dinners, distracted conversations, mysterious phone calls that made him step out of the room. When I asked what was wrong, he'd kiss my forehead and assure me everything was fine, that I was just being hormonal. But the unease in my chest grew stronger with each passing day. By the time I went into labor, I was carrying twins and the weight of a relationship that felt like it was slipping through my fingers. Ryan was there at the hospital, holding our babies with wonder in his eyes, but there was an invisible wall between us that I couldn't seem to break through. He looked at our children, our perfect, innocent babies, but he wouldn't quite meet my gaze. 3 weeks after bringing our twins home, Ryan walked into our small apartment, looking like a man condemned to death. His shoulders sagged under an invisible burden, and his eyes held a hollow emptiness that made my blood run cold. I was nursing our daughter while our son slept peacefully in his bouncer when I saw Ryan's expression. "We need to talk," he whispered, his voice barely audible. I settled our daughter in her crib with trembling hands, dread pooling in my stomach like ice water. "What's wrong, Ryan?" He couldn't look at me. His hands shook as he ran them through. His hair, the same gesture he'd always made when he was nervous, except this time it felt different. Final. "I can't do this anymore, Victoria," he said, each word falling like a stone into still water. I can't." The world stopped spinning. "Can't do what?" He took a shuddering breath, and when he finally looked at me, I saw a stranger. "I have to leave." The air turned arctic. I felt my heart physically break, not metaphorically, but actually shatter in my chest like glass hitting concrete. "Leave? What do you mean, leave?" "My mother was right," he said, and those 5 words destroyed everything we'd built together. "We don't belong in the same world. I can't stay." The tears came before I could stop them, hot and desperate. "You're leaving me? Leaving your own children? Because she told you to?" Ryan flinched as if I'd slapped him, but he didn't deny it. In that moment, I realized the man I'd fallen in love with, the man who'd promised to protect us forever, was gone. In his place stood a coward, a puppet dancing to his mother's tune, willing to trade his family for his inheritance. He turned his back on me and walked toward the door. I wanted to scream, to run to him and shake him until he came to his senses, but my body had turned to stone. "I'm sorry, Victoria," he whispered without turning around. The door clicked shut behind him with the finality of a coffin lid closing. I sat there staring at that closed door for what felt like hours, holding my breath and waiting for it to open. Again. Surely this was all some terrible nightmare. Surely the man who'd held me while I gave birth to his children wouldn't just leave. But he didn't come back. In our cramped apartment, it was just me and 2 tiny humans who had no idea their father had just abandoned them. The silence was deafening, broken only by the soft sounds of my baby's breathing and my own muffled sobs. The first week after Ryan left nearly broke me completely. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't function. My body still ached from childbirth, but that physical pain was nothing compared to the gaping hole where my heart used to be. I'd trusted him with everything. My love, my future, my children's security, and he'd thrown it all away like garbage. But then, on a rainy Thursday night as I held my crying son against my chest, something shifted inside me. As I looked down, at his perfect little face, red and scrunched with hunger, a fierce protectiveness rose up from somewhere deep in my soul. These babies didn't ask for any of this. They didn't deserve to suffer because their father was a coward and their grandmother was a monster. If I fell apart, who would take care of them? Who would love them unconditionally, the way every child deserved to be loved? Ryan had chosen his path. Now I had to choose mine. I wiped my tears, took the deepest breath of my life, and made a promise to my children and myself. I would not just survive this. I would build something beautiful from the ashes of my broken heart. Finding work as a new mother proved harder than I'd ever imagined. Before my pregnancy, I'd worked at a boutique design firm in Manhattan. But when I tried to return after the twins were born, I discovered my position had been filled. No one wanted to hire a single mother with newborns, someone who couldn't work late hours or travel at a moment's notice. I sent out dozens of applications, only to face rejection after rejection. Some employers were blunt about their concerns, others were more diplomatic. The message was always the same. I wasn't reliable enough, dedicated enough, flexible enough. Each rejection felt like another punch to my already battered confidence. But I refused to give up. I had no other choice. I cut every unnecessary expense, learned to live on beans and rice, and taught myself to change diapers with one hand while scrolling through job listings with the other. The sleepless nights continued, but now it was because my babies needed me, not because I was drowning in self-pity. After weeks of persistence, I finally landed a freelance interior design gig with a small firm. The pay was barely enough to cover rent and formula, but it was a start. I worked after the twins went to sleep, the glow of my laptop screen the only light in our dark apartment, designing spaces for other people while I figured out how to rebuild my own life. The idea that would change everything came to me on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon as I was folding the twins' laundry. I held up one of their onesies, a generic white thing that had already lost its shape after just a few washes, and felt frustrated by how poorly made most baby clothes were. The cute, well-designed pieces were ridiculously expensive, while the affordable options fell apart after a few trips through the washing machine. As I looked at my sleeping babies, an idea began to form. What if I could create clothes that were both beautiful and practical, pieces that busy parents could afford, without sacrificing quality or style? I wasn't a fashion designer, but I'd learned to sew from my grandmother when I was young. Those skills had been dormant for years, but they were still there, waiting to be rediscovered. I borrowed an old sewing machine from Mrs. Chen, my elderly neighbor, and started experimenting. My first attempts were disasters: wonky seams, uneven hems, patterns that looked nothing like what I'd envisioned. But slowly, painfully, I began to improve. I watched YouTube tutorials late into the night, practiced stitches until my fingers were sore, and gradually developed my own style. I started by making clothes just for my twins, but when I posted pictures on social media, friends began asking where they could buy similar pieces. That's when I realized I might have stumbled onto something bigger than I'd imagined. I had exactly $127 in my checking account when I decided to start my business. Every spare dollar went toward fabric and supplies. I taught myself not just how to sew better, but how to run an online store, manage inventory, and market products on social media. The learning curve was steep and often discouraging. My first website looked like it had been designed by a kindergartner. My product photos were blurry and unprofessional. I reached out to mommy bloggers and influencers, only to be ignored or rejected. But I kept going because I had no other choice. Named my brand Tiny Miracles, because that's what my children were to me, and because I believed every child deserved to be dressed like the miracle they were. My first real customer was a young mother in Seattle who ordered a newborn set for her daughter. When the payment notification popped up on my phone, I burst into tears right there in the grocery store checkout line. It wasn't about the money. It was proof that maybe, just maybe, I could make this work. Orders trickled in slowly at first. One here, two there. But each sale gave me the confidence to keep pushing forward. I reinvested every penny back into the business, gradually improving my designs, my website, and my marketing. 8 months after I'd sewn my first baby outfit, something magical happened. A popular mommy blogger with 500,000 followers posted about Tiny Miracles, gushing about the quality and unique designs of my pieces. Overnight, my inbox exploded with orders. I barely slept for 3 days straight, cutting fabric and sewing until my fingers were numb. I had to recruit Mrs. Chen and two other neighbors to help me package and ship orders. It was chaos, but it was the most beautiful chaos I'd ever experienced. Within 6 months, Tiny Miracles had grown from a desperate attempt to pay rent into a legitimate business. I was able to move out of our cramped studio into a 2-bedroom apartment with actual windows that let in sunlight. For the first time in over a year, I wasn't counting every penny or wondering how I'd afford formula and diapers. But the real victory wasn't financial. It was personal. I looked in the mirror one morning and didn't recognize the woman staring back at me. Gone was the broken, abandoned girl who'd been left behind. In her place stood someone stronger, more confident, and completely self-sufficient. I had built this, me. Without Ryan's money, without his family's connections, without anyone's help or approval. And that realization was more intoxicating than any success I could have imagined. 2 years into my journey as an entrepreneur, I received a text from a number I didn't recognize. "Victoria, it's Ryan. Can we talk?" I stared at that message for a full minute, feeling absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness, no curiosity, just emptiness where he used to live in my heart. I deleted the message without responding, but Ryan apparently wasn't willing to be ignored. A week later, I was at the park with the twins when I felt someone watching us. I looked up from pushing my daughter on the swing to see him standing about 50 feet away, looking like he'd aged a decade in the 2 years since I'd last seen him. The confident, polished man I'd once loved was gone. This Ryan looked tired, thin, and haunted. His expensive clothes hung loose on his frame, and his once bright eyes were dull with something that looked like regret. He approached slowly, like someone trying not to spook a wild animal. "You look incredible," he said softly. "I saw the article about you in Forbes. I always knew you were special. But this?" I didn't respond. I simply watched my children play, marveling at how little his presence affected me now. "I made a mistake, Victoria," he continued, his voice cracking slightly. "The biggest mistake of my life. I let my mother control me, and I lost everything that mattered." Finally, I looked at him directly. "Did you?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. "Did I what?" "Did you lose everything that mattered?" I asked calmly. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you got exactly what you wanted. Your mother's approval, your inheritance, your place in society." Ryan shook his head frantically. "No, that's not. I don't have any of that anymore. I walked away from all of it. From her, from the company, from everything. I realized that none of it meant anything without you and the kids." I nodded slowly, processing this information with the same emotional investment I might have for the weather forecast. "I see. And now you want what exactly?" "I want to try again," he said desperately. "I want to be the father I should have been from the beginning. I want to earn your forgiveness, your trust. I want to be part of our family." The words hung in the air between us. Once upon a time, hearing him say those things would have meant everything to me. I would have cried with relief and thrown myself into his arms, grateful that the man I loved had finally come to his senses. But that was a different Emma, a weaker Emma who thought she needed to be saved. "Ryan," I said gently, "I don't need you to be part of our family. We already are a family, complete and happy without you." The truth of those words hit him like a physical blow. He stumbled backward slightly, his face pale with shock. "But I love you," he whispered. "I never stopped loving you." I smiled, but it wasn't cruel. It was simply honest. "I'm sure you do. But love isn't enough, is it? You taught me that when you walked out that door 2 years ago." I stood up and called to my children. "Come on, babies. Time to go home." As I walked past Ryan, I paused for just a moment. Take care of yourself, Ryan. I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for. And then I left him standing there, alone, in a park full of families, while I walked toward my car with my children's hands in mine. That night, after I'd tucked the twins into their beds and read them their favorite story, I stood in my bathroom looking at myself in the mirror. The woman reflected back at me bore little resemblance to the girl who'd been abandoned in that tiny apartment 2 years ago. This woman was strong. She was successful. She was complete all by herself. I thought about Ryan's desperate plea, about how he'd claimed to realize his mistake too late. Part of me felt sorry for him, not because I wanted him back, but because I knew what it was like, to lose everything and have to start over. But the difference between us was that when I'd lost everything, I'd used it as fuel to build something better. When he'd lost everything, he'd come crawling back to the past, hoping to reclaim what he'd thrown away. I didn't hate him anymore. Hate requires emotional investment, and I simply didn't have any left for Ryan Wellington. He was a chapter in my story that had ended, and I'd moved on to writing new, more interesting chapters. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was my business partner calling about our upcoming expansion into European markets. Tiny Miracles had grown beyond my wildest dreams, and now we were looking at international opportunities. As I talked through marketing strategies and distribution channels, I realized how far I'd traveled from that broken woman who'd once begged Ryan not to leave. I'd built an empire from nothing, created jobs for dozens of people, and inspired countless other women to chase their own dreams. But more importantly, I'd raised 2 incredible children who knew they were loved unconditionally, who would never doubt their worth because their mother had never doubted hers. A year later, I was featured on the cover of Entrepreneur magazine as one of the 30 under 30 women changing business. The photo shoot was at my new flagship store in Manhattan, just a few blocks from where Ryan and I had first met in that little coffee shop. During the interview, the journalist asked me about my biggest challenge in building Tiny Miracles. Learning. To believe in myself, I answered without hesitation. For a long time, I thought I needed someone else to validate my dreams, to make me feel worthy of success. The day I realized I was enough all by myself, that was the day everything changed. "Do you have any regrets?" she asked. I thought about that question for a long time. Did I regret falling in love with Ryan? Did I regret the pain he'd caused me? Did I regret the struggle of those early days as a single mother? No, I said finally. Every experience, even the painful ones, led me to where I am today. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. That evening, I took the twins to the park, the same park where Ryan had made his desperate plea for forgiveness. My daughter ran toward the swings while my son chased butterflies in the grass, their laughter filling the air like music. As I watched them play, I realized that this was what happiness looked like, not the fairy tale romance I'd once dreamed of, but something deeper and more real. It was the satisfaction of knowing I'd built this life with my own hands, the pride of raising children who were confident and loved, the peace that came from being completely at home in my own skin. A young woman approached me hesitantly. "Excuse me, are you Victoria Morrison from Tiny Miracles?" I nodded, smiling. "I just wanted to thank you," she said, tears in her eyes. "I'm going through a divorce, and your story. It gave me hope that I could make it on my own, that I could be strong enough." I reached out and squeezed her hand. "You are strong enough. You always were. Sometimes we just need to be reminded." As she walked away, I felt a warmth spread through my chest that had nothing to do with success or money or recognition. It was the knowledge that my pain had not been wasted, that my struggle had served a purpose beyond just my own survival. I looked up at the sky, painted in shades of pink and gold by the setting sun, and made a silent promise to that broken woman. I used to be, "Thank you for not giving up. Thank you for believing we could be more than what they said we were. Thank you for fighting so that she this woman, this mother, this entrepreneur, could exist. The twins ran to me, grass stains on their knees and joy in their eyes. As I gathered them close, breathing in their sweet scent and feeling their small hearts beat against mine, I knew with absolute certainty that I had won. Not against Ryan, not against his mother, but against the voice in my head that had once whispered I wasn't enough. I had proven that voice wrong in every possible way, and this was only the beginning. This story isn't about revenge or bitterness. It's about the incredible strength that lives inside every person, waiting to be discovered. It's about the journey, from brokenness to wholeness, from dependence to independence, from victim to victor. Victoria's story reminds us that sometimes the most beautiful chapters of our lives begin when we stop waiting for someone else to write them for us. What did you think of Victoria's journey? Have you ever had to rebuild your life from nothing? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories about resilience, family, and the power of never giving up.